And let's go ahead and officially open the meeting. I hope you've all had a wonderful month and are doing well. It's nice to see you all. So anything before we jump in with approving the minutes? And we have 2 sets of minutes if you had a chance to take a look at that. Is there any announcements or anything you want to get ahead of that? Okay. All right then, is there a motion to, let's start with the July 28th minutes. Is there a motion to approve? And I understand there were 2 sets. An updated one came in from Carrie. So yes, Peter, go ahead.
I do have I have like 5, I would call them typos or non-substantive, no, 6. Non-substantive, which I can get to Carrie afterwards, and 1 semi-substantive on the bottom of page 6.
Okay.
I'll dispense with the 6 and just talk the 3rd line from the bottom of page 6. It says, and discontinue the property tax after 1 year. I believe that should say, and discontinue the sales tax after 1 year.
Okay.
And I'll get the other ticky-tacky ones.
Okay. Yeah, so Carrie, if you're on, or Candace, we can make a note of those. And Peter, can you send those non-substantive ones?
It's not gonna work on volume, is it?
Okay. I just have one reflective comment about the minutes, and that is there's a lot of detail in these. And again, I think that was raised last time as a question. It's helpful to help us keep on track and remember the conversation. But it's just a check-in, Gary. Are we on okay ground with this level of detail as a public proceeding?
Yes, you can make the minutes out to be more detailed or less detailed. It depends on the author of the minutes. This is Carrie putting together those, and this is what she sees as summarizing the agenda on for each meeting.
Okay. Okay. Jerry, were you wanting to speak?
No, I was just giving my wife a hand signal.
Okay. Okay. All right. Any other comments then? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion. Do we approve them?
Yeah, approve. Okay. The July 28th minutes as corrected, as Peter has indicated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Well, okay. The motion approves unanimously to approve the minutes from July 28th. And now we have moving on to August 11th, which is just a note essentially to the file that we did have the tour of the Carefree fire station, and we're hosted by Rural Metro in that tour. It looks like roughly half of us were able to attend. I was not fortunate enough to attend. But why don't we get a motion, and then if we could take a second, and I'd love to hear from those of you who are able to attend, if you have any reflections or things that stood out for you in that. So is there a motion to approve the minutes of August 11th as presented?
I'll move to approve those minutes.
Okay, Kim, motion, second?
Second.
Phil. All right, I see Phil. Okay, seconded by Phil. Any discussion? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, that motion is approved, the August 11th minutes. Okay, and taking a minute, for those of you who are here with us on the call and attended, is there any reflection or anything you want to share about that experience, or you want to bring forward?
I'll go ahead.
Anybody that didn't go, I think it would be worthwhile for them to take just a run through at the fire station. It was quite impressive to know what we've got over there, the equipment, the people and so forth. I thought it was a real informative tour.
Thanks. Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, and Jerry, thanks for your write-up about the tour. I too was quite impressed, and it was very thorough and very informative.
Thank you.
Were there any surprises? Things that stood out to you that are salient for the conversation we've been having?
I guess the one thing that struck me was that maybe it was lack of understanding on Scottsdale's part, but in their estimated cost or ballpark cost, they included a lot of money for equipment. And all of the equipment that's on that truck is already the property of Carefree. And it was just, there was a lot of equipment that we already have that I think that they included in their ballpark cost estimates. That was, and it was not an insubstantial number. A lot of stuff there.
Okay.
I think that was one of the things that impressed me also, Peter, was the amount of equipment, the quality of it, and the way it's been maintained. I think we've been very fortunate so far. It was a good investment.
Scott, welcome to you. We almost see you.
Thank you. I'm in Indiana with my grandson, so I can't stay for the whole thing.
Oh, okay. Well, I just asked the question for those of you who were able to go on the tour, if you had any reflective comments.
Yeah, I thought it was very informative, and I too was impressed with the operation and the equipment, and it seems to be a first-rate operation.
Okay.
If I may ask a question to the committee members that were there, I know there's been discussion about a new fire truck or an upgraded fire truck and/or accessories, whether we went to automatic aid or not. I'm curious if any discussions were had with Rural Metro while on site, if we re-upped for the mutual aid, if they feel that the same way that the automatic aid areas felt that we would need to upgrade that truck at all, anywhere in the near future.
What came across to me is that the big issue with the truck, I mean, just because of its years maybe, but more importantly is the difficulty in finding parts. That's kind of the showstopper on the truck, you know, unless you really want to go on a scavenger hunt every time you need a
Yes, and just to further that, the truck is American LaFrance. That was a major player in the business, and they actually went out of business about 5 or 6 years ago. So it's become very difficult to find parts for our current truck, which is the motivation to replace that truck in the future.
I guess there was one other thing that was very interesting to me, that the Phoenix Fire Department is one of only 2 fire departments in the country that uses a certain kind of fitting on their fire hydrants and on their hoses. And that they're the only one in Arizona, and the other one is like Boston or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or someplace like that. And every department in the valley has to carry adapters to be able to hook up, to interconnect with Phoenix hoses or to hook up to a Phoenix fire hydrant, which I thought was pretty interesting. Stupid, but pretty interesting.
Yeah, we never really were told why that was, whether Phoenix was just there first or whether they just chose to be different.
It was kind of alluded to at one point. They were worried about people stealing water, so they came up with the hydrants. So they came up with a different attachment. So now there's all kinds of fittings on the truck that adapts our hoses or our whatever to Phoenix and back and forth. That was it.
Interesting.
Trivial, but interesting.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying, the replacement of the truck seems, Gary, like something that needs to proceed in any event.
Yes.
And is there a capital budget, an acquisition budget for that? Or is that have kind of been put on hold until we get closer to a decision?
It's on hold right now. Obviously, we have to consider it in context with the decision points here. So collectively moving that forward. So yes, it's on hold right now.
I think the important thing that I got out of that too is that if we do decide to go with Phoenix or Daisy Mountain, then they're going to have a big input as to what they want, how they want it, when they want it, instead of us being able to go with what we would like to have that suits our needs.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for those of you who attended and sharing that, and yet duly noted about an opportunity to go and tour it for those of us who were not able to be there. So I'll definitely keep that in my head. So, okay. Anything else? Any other updates? I'm going to turn this over, Gary, to you at this point. Before we launch into the working document, which is essentially, hopefully you all received that, the piece I put together is very much a talking point document that we can use to help guide discussion and populate as we go and kind of flesh out. So before we jump into that though, Gary, do you want to share what's been going on in the world?
Yep. And appreciate that, Leslie. So after each one of these meetings, I hear from various players, whether it be Scottsdale, Daisy Mountain, Rural Metro, as well as Cave Creek. And we have an open dialogue with Cave Creek. I have an excellent open line of communication with Chief Ford, who's representing Cave Creek in their transaction to build their own fire service within the town of Cave Creek. One of the things this past week that Cave Creek did was they're looking to own all the assets, similar to the model in Carefree, and then contract out for the labor. They're also interested in joining automatic aid. And we heard from Cave Creek and their viewpoint relative to automatic aid. So one of the first steps in that process of forming their own fire department and perhaps contracting out for the labor is to acquire some of those assets. One of those assets is obviously a fire station. They have looked at a number of sites and they have arrived at a site, currently the existing Rural Metro fire station in Cave Creek. They're looking at a lease purchase agreement to enter that on October 15th to lease it through the beginning of next year, at which time on January 15th, they would execute an agreement to purchase that fire station and then facilitate improvements to that fire station so that they can move in their respective choice as far as the labor force. So they're moving ahead with that. Subsequent to that public discussion, Rural Metro contacted me and stated that they are very interested in maintaining a firehouse on the west side, but it's going to take some time. And they need an opportunity to relocate that engine company to our fire station on a short-term basis. So one of the items on the council agenda in September is to relocate the Cave Creek Fire Company at the Cave Creek Station to the Carefree Fire Station. We have an extra bay there. We also have the extra facilities. Those that were on tour at the firehouse saw the community room that we have. In the past, that was used as a bunkhouse when they did construction to the Cave Creek, when Rural Metro did construction to the Cave Creek Station, and they moved their company over to the Carefree Fire Station on a temporary basis. So they would look at doing something similar and pay the town of Carefree $5,000 per month to house that fire station there. Now, the nice thing about having that there is it assures us that if there's simultaneous calls, that we have 2 fire companies within the town of Carefree that can respond. It will delay response over to the west side for medical calls, but one of the things that Rural Metro is also actively pursuing is locating an ambulance on the west side of Black Mountain. And there's a number of alternatives that they're exploring at this point in time. So that's all being worked through Rural Metro. That agenda item, once again, will be on the council agenda on September 7th to consider entering into a lease with Rural Metro for that second unit to be housed in the Carefree Fire Station. So any questions related to what's evolving there in Cave Creek and Rural Metro's reaction to that respective action in Cave Creek?
Gary, if I understand that correctly, we'll get the EMT would operate solely out of our fire station temporarily. There'd be 2 of those there.
Yes, yes. The fire emergency services. So there'll be 2 engines at our fire station. There'll be an ambulance also at our fire station, and another ambulance somewhere on the west side.
Does that not add approximately, I think that I got this straight, about 2 to 3 minutes response time if they have to come from our station to the west side?
Yes, that does. Any other questions or thoughts?
Just curious, is the engine that they would locate that would be coming from Cave Creek, is it a similar sort of engine as we have there, or does it complement the equipment we already have there?
It does complement the equipment. It's a slightly different engine. It's a newer engine. I believe it's a couple years old. So it's probably the best version of what we have today.
And that then what we might see is more volume of traffic out of the fire station responding to calls that are coming in there than for any of their subscribers.
That is true, yes.
Okay.
All right. So that's what's evolving with Cave Creek and their respective purchase there. The next thing is, at the end of our last meeting, the committee asked me to put together a request for qualifications, or an RFP proposal, and put it out to the respective providers. And those respective providers are Rural Metro, Daisy Mountain, and the city of Scottsdale. The city of Phoenix has decided not to enter any contract negotiations with either Cave Creek or Carefree. So those are the 3 providers that provide service to the town of Carefree. Subsequent to our meeting, I was contacted by the chiefs of both Scottsdale and Daisy Mountain, and in their own way basically said that they are not interested at this time in an RFQ process. They said that they provided a high-level estimate to the board or the committee, and that high-level estimate is a pretty good indication of what it will cost, both in startup costs, our initial year costs, and then future costs for that fire contract. And in the future, if the council chooses to go with automatic aid, then they would enter into negotiations with us over a respective contract. So they would like the decision to be upfront to enter automatic aid and then respond to a contract with the town of Carefree. Now, the issue there is, as we all know, looking at the figures, the cost of a master contract with Rural Metro is approximately $1.9 million if we entered in a contract tomorrow. That would be a 5-year contract. That will be a flat rate for the first 3 years, and there'll be some type of escalator the 4th year to cover any increases in their renegotiated labor contract. So that's what's proposed with Rural Metro. With Daisy Mountain, they proposed an initial year contract of $2.4 million and approximately $500,000 in startup costs. With this, and also it was thrown out that we would probably look at some type of inflationary index of about 5%. Now, if you apply 5% to $2.4 million, you get $120,000, and that's compounded over the course of that contract term. So take that over 10 years, that's well over $1 million. Once again, the issue with automatic aid is it's a great system, and we have to come up with a funding mechanism to support the increase of that municipal system. Most other communities have a revenue source that looks at a property tax to help fund or offset the cost of this liability. So that's something that we're struggling with, trying to reconcile. Going to Scottsdale, we're looking at initial year of $2.8 million, and I believe their startup costs were somewhere in the range of $700,000, so $3.5 million for the initial year. We didn't get to discuss the escalators, the annual escalators on that contract, but that would be something that would be determined by the city of Scottsdale, most likely on an annual basis. So therein lies the other rub with automatic aid, is something that you give away. And so I believe Jerry brought this up at our last meeting, is there's decisions that are made by these outside political entities that we will not control. With rural Metro, we have a level of control with that. So there are some things associated with automatic aid that we have to, take into consideration. But subsequent to our last meeting, I did receive those respective comments from Chief Shannon from Scottsdale and Chief Tobin from Daisy Mountain, that stated that they would not respond to an RFQ. So based upon that, it would have taken me 3 to 4 weeks to put this RFQ together, knowing that we wouldn't have parties to respond. It was a little waste of my time to work on that. So I was disappointed that they wouldn't go through that process so that we could better understand their models of service and respective costs. But that's their stance at this point in time. So that being said, that's where we are relative to the RFQ. And we know at a high level what it would cost us for automatic aid, and essentially some of the pros and cons associated with automatic aid and mutual aid. And we understand what we have with rural Metro. Any questions or thoughts related to that conversation point?
I just would like to comment again on the point that I think that I keep beating the same drum. I like to see it that we make our decisions as to what we want to do and have more control. It's good to think about having all of the bells and whistles of automatic aid, but again, how many times have we used it? How much would we use it? And I think that given the huge difference, and let me say huge difference in cost as far as I see here, that we can proceed for a period of time. And then if we find that it's not working, we do have an option of moving in another direction. So I think that's, again, the point that I feel is one of the most important, is having our own council and our own town management running our show.
I just want to insert here a note of appreciation to the Scottsdale Fire Department and the Daisy Mountain Fire District for showing up and being so gracious in sharing the information they have. And I certainly appreciate and respect their position and what they're able to offer. And I'm glad, for the clarification, we can now move forward, right? But I do think I just want on record that appreciation and thanks to both those entities, regardless of how we proceed going forward. What they provided us to date has been very valuable, and I really appreciate their involvement in the conversation and their willingness to take us this far. So just
It's
to leave.
nice to know that they and we are part of a community that does care about everybody else. And then you have to put in the figures and say, what makes the most sense to me? And I agree with you. And if I remember the last time when we went through this, we had the same kind of cooperation with the adjacent areas and found the same level of communication and cooperation. So it's a good point, Leslie.
I have a question. Gary, based on the numbers we've seen so far for the incremental costs of automatic aid, do we have any sense for how much a property tax would be if that was chosen to fund the entire fire protection operation?
Well, that was our last presentation given by Peter and Sheila. So
Sorry if I missed
yeah,
that.
Yeah, so we looked at a sliding scale anywhere between 97 cents per limited valuation to upwards to $1.66. So based upon if you want to still have that sales tax offsetting part of this liability, or you want to put this entire liability on
property tax.
Property tax, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was for $3 million, the 166 would pay for the full master contract. 97 cents, including the 1% sales tax, would cover the same amount.
Okay.
And Sheila, remind me for the average size home in Carefree,
Yeah.
what would that?
Yeah, it was
plan-
$580 a year for the average Carefree resident.
For which level, Sheila? The 97 cents or the,
Yes,
for the 90?
at
Hold on a
97 cents, at $1.66.
Yeah,
900.
Okay.
And
yeah, sorry.
somebody, I think it was Leslie, you raised the question last time about the timing of this whole thing and how if the council did want to go and ask for voter approval of a property tax, we kind of almost don't have enough time to do that. And would it be possible to extend our contract with Rural Metro a little bit, but not for 5 years? Is that a non-starter?
Gary?
I could probably address that one, Scott. Yes, I did have a discussion with Rural Metro, and they were not interested in a short-term contract. They have obviously employees to support, and to do something like that on a short term does not make sense for them. So they would actually have to bow out. So you can't be half pregnant in this equation here. So we gotta yes, figure it out. So the thought obviously turns to a longer term contract with Rural Metro.
Could I just pose another question on that topic? If we were to renew a contract, whether it was for a few years or longer with Rural Metro, are we still looking at a property tax increase to get to those numbers based on what our reserves are? I know they probably wouldn't be as high as going with one of the automatic aid options, but I'm just curious if we'd still need to do that as well.
I think the intention of our conversation, and if we're ready, we can move into that framework, because that's one of the key questions I think we need to address and settle on and have a recommendation. That very question that you're asking is one I think it's reasonable for us to get our arms around and to offer opinion and recommendation on. So that is the work. Before we go there exactly, Gary, was there anything in terms of updates on the tax side, on the revenue side, that you wanted to share?
Yes, yeah. So last year was a very unique year with COVID. You would thought that we would have had a significant contraction in our sales tax. Well, it was just the opposite. When I planned for this past fiscal year, I was planning for a significant contraction due to the economic shutdowns that we were experiencing at the time we were preparing the budget, and everybody across the state and nation from a governmental perspective was preparing for the worst. So one of the things I looked at was a shortfall of approximately 20% in revenue. Well, it wound up that we were up dramatically, about 35%, almost 36% in our sales tax revenue at $4.87 million. If you do the math and you divide by 3, that means that the 1% allocated, or the 1/3 allocated to our master contract, we put 1.623 million in the bucket. This past year, that fire contract was 1.52 million. So we actually had a surplus for the first time in 10 years. Whether that's an anomaly or not, that's the unknown with elastic revenue stream. Sometimes you outperform yourselves, and sometimes there's significant contractions. And we don't know if a significant business would leave town, and that's the danger of relying heavily on a sales tax model. Is how does the economy perform, and there's things that we cannot control as a town that are made by the private sector that adversely impact our tax base. So we have to be cognizant about that. And when you have fixed revenue or fixed costs like this, you got to factor in the risk associated with that. So that's something that, through our discussions, we're trying to struggle and reconcile and plan for the future. And that's, part of your task. So yeah, good news with the revenue, but I wouldn't consider that the rule of thumb. I would consider that the exception of the rule.
Well, congratulations to us all. Yeah. That's good news. That's the direction we want to head in, right? So yeah, Jerry.
Gary, I have one question. When I spoke to Jim, I guess it was last week or the week before, it seems like the amount of money that we were going to get from the federal funds in 22 and 23 was quite a bit higher than what was originally thought it was going to be. Has there been any clarification there on that?
I think we're slated to get about $650,000, which is about $50,000 more, if I recall correctly, than we anticipated.
And that's for both years or for each year?
Yeah, for each year. Yeah. So 2 successful years. Successive.
Okay. Any other updates on that revenue side, Gary, that you want to share, or anything generally that might be helpful as we proceed for the rest of the conversation?
No, we always talk about sales tax, but I think we have to talk about also state shared revenue. And that is always something that we're concerned about. So each municipality in the state is concerned about. And there's a lot of competing demand at the state level, and a fixed pot of money. We just got our census numbers, and our community is approaching 3,700 residents. But there's many more communities that grew at a higher rate than the town of Carefree did. So what does that all mean? The pot of money is still the same. It's just divided up differently. So our share of that pot per capita is going to be reduced over time. In addition, there's always changes in legislation and sweeps of funds that we have to be cognizant about in the future. 25% of our annual revenue comes through state shared revenue. So it's another important revenue stream, but something that is not something that we should rely on. So it's not as elastic as the sales tax, but it's not increasing like our sales tax can increase. It actually will be decreasing over time. So that's another important part of our revenue stream that we have to be aware of, and the respective trends that are impacting it.
Gary, can I pause for a second on that one number? What was the population number again, the updated?
According to the census, we're at 3,690.
And now that are permanent residents or people who claim Arizona as a resident state. So do we have any sense on additionally the population of folks that is part of our community but would not show up in those numbers? But
I have not, yes, a great point. I have not seen those numbers as of yet.
But do we see that at the American Community Survey that fleshes that out, or how do we start to?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get something through MAG that defines that, the source of that information, whether it's US Census or that respective source. I don't know at this point in time.
Okay, and do we have any kind of census on the number of residential structures in town? Do we have any breakout about our housing stock in terms of what that looks like and how many structures?
Yeah, we're a little bit over 2,200 residents in town, but I can get you that exact figure. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue.
And we don't know the breakout between single family and multi-family dwelling.
I don't have that right now. Yes, we have some information on that, but I don't have access to it right now.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
If I may just chime in, one of the things I find interesting about the sales tax revenue increasing that doesn't surprise me, especially being here the last 2 years and seeing what the market's been like in our town and the demand and the low inventory, I think people will continue to come into Carefree, that are probably above the average means compared to a lot of other towns in the state that are willing to spend the money locally at the current sales rate or even an increase if that was to be needed for any reason. And I think when we look at those numbers, worst case scenario, $1.66 for the average homeowner to spend $500 to $700 more a year on, let's say, a single family average home, I don't think is going to make or break. Obviously, that would come down to a vote, but I think the type of clientele and residents we're dealing with, we'll continue to see those sales tax numbers increase, and we'll see, hopefully, people will vote for a property tax if it's needed for either automatic or mutual aid.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Gary, on the update side?
Nope.
Okay. Any other questions or reflections on that? Okay. Well, if it's helpful, I'd like to draw your attention to the attachment you all got, which is just listed as kind of my draft notes and more of a discussion guide. Please, I underscore draft in this, and again, offer it up, building on, Peter, the piece you put together over a month ago, I think, to just help us stay on track and continue to frame the discussion and the eventual communication that we pass along regarding these questions and recommendations to the council. So I took a stab. It's not even really been completely edited, so it wouldn't be up to my standards for any kind of final product, but it's just something to help us say, okay, here's where we've been, here's what we've done, and here's the context for it. So I thought maybe if you've had a chance to look at it, what might be helpful in general is just in my thinking a way to divide this conversation into essentially 2 tracks. And I offered 3 different tables to try to help organize the information, all with the intent is to try to develop the rationale for whichever way we go with the decision. It doesn't assume the direction is that we've made that decision or that we know exactly which way we're going. It just starts to line up what our rationale would be for whichever direction we choose to go. And the other, so on those 2 sides, it has to do with this question of automatic aid versus mutual aid and what serves the town of Carefree and its residents and businesses today and perhaps going forward on the longer run. And then the second part of the question and conversation is how do we pay for those services in whatever way that they're constituted? What is our revenue picture that pays for important public safety services in the town of Carefree? So those kind of being the two pillars, I guess, that are, connected one to the other, but for ease and organization of conversation, maybe to try to separate those out. And then the question I have generally as we do this work, wondering in terms of our role as a citizen advisory committee, if we find ourselves unable to make a clear, unified consensus, if we're unable to reach that in terms of the direction we go, that we be prepared to clearly identify the options as we see them in our thinking regarding those options. But as a citizen committee, that it may be beyond us to clearly make a definite direction. And I just want to leave open that possibility for doing that. If we can, great. I'd love to get there. I just want to leave room for the possibility that in this very complex issue with lots of moving parts, maybe our value will be a clear elucidation of the pros and cons of an issue, and present that for council to deliberate on and to make an ultimate decision on. So if there's any thoughts on that, but maybe we'll all get of one mind and I'll get behind a similar recommendation that we can live with, and that will also be important and great. So I don't want to preclude that, but I just wanted to open a door to other possibility. Okay. Before we step into it, if anyone's taken a look at this whole thing, any reflective comments before we jump into it on this?
Leslie, I appreciate you doing that. I thought it was very helpful to see the pros and cons outlined. It's makes for a lot of clarity in deciding. As far as just something that I was thinking about, I think I've always come into this a little bit of a proponent of that we could stay with mutual aid, not necessarily have the need for auto aid. However, Gary's update today concerns me a little bit about Cave Creek taking up that West Side Fire Station. Now I'm not certain if mutual aid, for the time being anyhow, is putting us in a position of having a service deficit to the west side of Carefree and nearly doubling a response time. So that's kind of a new development today that has put my thought process in a little slightly different way.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. That west side coverage is a big question mark for how that happens.
Madam Chairwoman, Gary, what is Rural Metro's intention about a firehouse on the west side?
Their intention is to maintain a presence over there, but they are trying to identify the best site for them. And when I say the best site, they have a large county island to the south of both Carefree and Cave Creek that they service through subscriptions. That respective county island supports this respective fire station, or will support this respective fire station, as well as the west side of Black Mountain. They would like to stay somewhere along that Cave Creek Road alignment north of Carefree Highway, and are looking at several options, but they have not identified these options as of yet.
So it's entirely possible that they could locate their station down in those county islands south of us.
There's a possibility, yes.
I mean, that's where their service territory is going to be, right?
Yes.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that their Cave Creek location or around that Cave Creek location is optimal for what they're doing now, assuming Cave Creek moves forward with the master contract.
That is correct, yes.
So where are those county islands?
It's south of Carefree Highway, and it's not a regular pattern. It's a irregular pattern. So It's in between Phoenix and Scottsdale, south of Carefree Highway.
So what's the southern border? Is it like Lone Mountain or is it?
It, in some cases, goes all the way down to, I believe, Dynamite Boulevard,
Oh,
or
really?
just north of Dynamite.
So conceivably their new station could be down that far, huh?
It could be, yes.
Okay.
With the area that they service, if I remember the maps right, by the time you take Carefree as a whole, east side and west side, and then that island, comparing the islands that they do service, our area is larger than all of the other ones combined, is it not?
Yes. Yes, our service area would be larger.
And have they said anything about the timing of, or estimated? I mean, we're talking about a couple of years probably before that happens, right?
Don't know. They could put in a temporary station relatively quickly. Once they find a site, they could negotiate with a property owner that already has an existing building that they can do some adaptive reuse of and perhaps move in quickly as well too. Or, buy a piece of land. So there's several options in front of them.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if we could turn our attention to the first table and this document I created. And what I would really love is to flesh out these pros and cons. So I took from my notes and as much of the conversation as I could recall so far, and offered some bullet points to start us off. But I did not think that this would be completed. And so I wanted to invite you to weigh in and to offer your thinking on pros and cons for the automatic and mutual aid. And the question is, in this question of the coverage for the west side, have we adequately described that in the pros and cons? So I've included that, I believe. The west side in the second bullet under mutual aid and in the cons column, I've noted that this coverage of west side is in fact a concern, and how that gets addressed. Is there more we should add there? Or just in general, are there other bullet points to add in this summary?
I have something about under the pros or con, I'm not sure which one, under mutual aid. I went back and reviewed the Daisy Mountain presentation that we had, and they were quite explicit that Daisy Mountain does not have a mutual aid agreement with Rural Metro. They don't have one. They have discussed it in the past. They have proposed contracts, but they've never closed that deal. And also in that presentation, it was brought out that Scottsdale Fire District has an expired mutual aid reimbursement agreement with Rural Metro. So we're talking about mutual aid, but as far as I know, Rural Metro, and maybe if they're listening, they can ping Gary or something. Rural Metro does not have a mutual aid agreement with either Scottsdale or with Daisy Mountain. And that's quite a bit of concern, especially considering the west side and where their center of gravity is besides Carefree is down in the county island. So that ought to be brought out as a con to mutual aid, it would seem to me.
So
To address that point, the town of Carefree, as well as Rural Metro, I believe still have a standing mutual aid compact with the city of Scottsdale. And Chief Shannon, if I recall correctly, stated that he would continue to honor that mutual aid pact.
That's a point of clarification because
Yeah,
I'm looking at the slide that was in that Daisy Mountain Scottsdale presentation. And the slide reads, Scottsdale Fire Department has an expired mutual aid reimbursement agreement with RMFD, which is currently under review. The mutual aid agreement is not between the city of Scottsdale and the town of Carefree. That's what they put up on the screen, and it concerns me. But then them not having a mutual aid agreement for the west side also concerns me, because based on the statistics that they have made available, and we've asked several times for statistics from rural metro, and they promised them, but they haven't gotten back to us on how many calls Carefree answers, no, Cave Creek answers in Carefree. If that area gets taken over by Daisy Mountain and we have no mutual aid agreement with Daisy Mountain, where does that leave us? And is that putting pressure on us to deploy a station on the west side of Carefree? I'm just lost on that question. But it's of great concern to me. That has to be, it's at least noted in your pros and cons under mutual aid.
So the question, is it a pro or con, or is it a precondition that has to be addressed?
I would be very hesitant to recommend going with rural metro without some kind of guarantee of how we're going to address coverage on the west side of Carefree.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a matter of policy, to have, some kind of agreement with Daisy Mountain. If we in fact have got a third or 20% of our calls into Carefree coming from that existing Cave Creek station, once they're out of there, are we just going to accept a 6 or a 9 minute response time to that part of the city, the town? It's very concerning.
So that if you do not have a mutual aid agreement with a neighboring fire district, that means that they would not come to help.
I don't know that in this world, it seems to be pretty fluid. I will say, I think that both towns are describing mutual aid and / reimbursement agreements, so that I think the example that Daisy Mountain provided us in some of their data showed that they have submitted bills to Cave Creek and Carefree or rural metro, and rural metro denied them under the basis that they don't have a mutual aid agreement. I don't know what that, I don't know.
The other question I would have in that balance is, how many times does Carefree respond to the south end of Cave Creek, to Stagecoach and the bars in that area, because it's the closest responding station? Even, the current configuration with the existing rural metro station on the west side of Black Mountain, the Carefree station remains the closest responding center to, a lot of that Cave Creek area, bar area. So is there a balance or some sort of agreement that runs that way? And
well, between rural metro, how they deploy their assets to cover the master contract has been immaterial. Generally speaking, has been immaterial.
correct, up to now.
Up till now. So
Right.
now you're going to have, obviously, Daisy Mountain move into the same station. Now, one of the things that the tour pointed out is that as an operating agreement between the two stations within rural metro, that schoolhouse has been the dividing line as to who responds where,
Right.
extending that south of the mountain as well. I mean, we just don't, we don't know what the arrangement's going to be without rural metro in Cave Creek.
Correct.
And with all I'm saying is there's no mutual aid agreement, which then throws all of these cards up in the air. And it has to be something that we should be concerned about. And perhaps point that out to, you know, we have motions in here, but in effect, if rural metro, and I don't know if it has to be rural metro or the town of Carefree, does not have a mutual aid agreement in place with either Daisy Mountain or Scottsdale, we're standing on our own. Mutual aid isn't a reality right now.
We entered into a mutual aid, the town of Carefree, a mutual aid agreement with the city of Scottsdale on May 17th, 2005. So we have historically had this in place in which we respond a mile in, they respond a mile into Carefree. And it's for the past 16 years has worked and we've cooperated, and rural metro has responded into Scottsdale and Scottsdale has responded into Carefree under this respective agreement.
And it also, I do actually have a copy of that. It does say that it does recognize that the town doesn't have a provide municipal fire service, and they do have a licensing agreement with rural metro. So it is recognized that the agreement is between the town of Carefree, the town of Scottsdale, and there's a licensing agreement with rural metro that represents the town of Carefree.
Is there any deadline to that agreement, Sheila?
I don't see it.
I would just like clarification on that, given the
Yeah.
slide that they stuck in the presentation that was
Yeah.
made to us.
So
That agreement still in effect, to your knowledge?
Yes.
So it seems under the con side then in mutual aid is that there's uncertainty. There's some real question at this point about whether the existing mutual aid agreements continue and under what conditions. So the con is the uncertainty. We don't know. And that uncertainty makes it difficult. So
And we use our history of how many times we did use or needed to use, let's call it an automatic aid or other people, compared to the amount of times that rural metro was taking care of us by themselves. I don't know if my statement was clear enough.
Would you restate it?
In other words, to know, when I talked to Chief Cross before he left. We had a couple of meetings, and it was my understanding from him that we responded to Carefree, Cave Creek many more times than what they in turn responded to us. And it also, in relation to Scottsdale, there was virtually no times that they responded to us, and we did respond to them a few times, not very often. So in other words, the need, our needs were being taken care of by rural metro, no matter what side of the mountain that they had to service. And I think that's where I felt like that we needed to know, and based on what Gary told us earlier, that if rural metro had to temporarily relocate over here, that it would add 1 minute to possibly 2 minutes onto the response team or response time, which is in sometimes some points can be considerable if your place is on fire. But it seemed like to me that it was serving us well so far. That doesn't mean that it would continue, but that at this point we were being serviced and we were giving service more than we were receiving it.
Yeah, I've reviewed the 3 annual reports and through Gary have requested updated information. Gary's got a memo from Ryan Gilbert, who in that memo, it indicated that in 1920, fiscal year 19 and 20, that our station 821 was dispatched 807 times, and of that 490 times it went into the town of Carefree. In that same memo, he indicated that if you look at reciprocal calls in that same year, their data says that they only responded 300 times outside of the town, but their annual report says, or the memo from Chief Gilbert says something else, but that station 825, I think, which is the Cave Creek station, responded in the Carefree 102 times. So we had 490 calls, plus or minus 500 calls, say, with our own station in the Carefree. We also had 100 calls from the Cave Creek station in the Carefree. So you're talking about 100 out of 600 calls is coming from outside, or has been. And, you know, it seems to me that Rural Metro just has a hell of a time pulling data out of their own IT shop to find out what ought to be, in my opinion, pretty simple statistics that have been asked for by this committee several times.
If I may follow up on Peter's point, I think is excellent. I think one of the things to keep in mind when we're looking at rural metro responding to incidents or calls between both towns is that Cave Creek's a much bigger town area wise, and obviously has a lot more residents. So I think, you know, you have to compare apples to apples. So I think in there's a little imbalance when we're looking at overall numbers of how we respond to them or they respond to us. We're just a smaller town. I think the bigger issue is the unknowns, right? We had that Ocotillo fire, which most of you are well aware on the impact it had, not only on the homes that were lost, but the surrounding values to the real estate and how long that will take to come back. You know, we haven't had that in Carefree. And I think the question for me, at least, is if something like that happened in Carefree, would we be better equipped to have mutual aid or automatic aid? And that's really what it comes down to. If Carefree were to experience a loss of a dozen or 20 or 24 homes, God forbid a fire came regardless, I think it could have a huge economic impact moving forward on probably what is our strongest, you know, profit or what have is, you know, the home ownership and the values going up. So I think at the end of the day, I think numbers wise, it makes sense to stay with rural metro. I think we need more information and some more details. But at the same time, you know, my only concern would be if we did experience a fire like what happened in Cave Creek last year and we were not on automatic aid, will we get the same response? I mean, there's no way rural metro could have put out that fire on its own any quicker than it did, and we saw how much devastation it had. So I think that's just something to keep in perspective. So.
I think that's just the crux of it is that if we ever entered into you know, one of those types of situations, the automatic aid is really the most efficient and immediate regional response that is, you know, much more robust. So we've never had to use that. Rural Metro has done a fine job for everything we've needed as a community. But if that ever did occur, it would be better, I believe, to have a robust regional response that's very well coordinated rather than, you know, having rural metro go in and then having to try to get everybody else on board. Now, would everybody else come on board? I believe they would. They would, unless there was something else as big going on somewhere else that was pulling their, people away. But in general, I think what I've heard from Daisy Mountain and Scottsdale is that they wouldn't just leave us to fend for ourselves in any situation.
And
But-
I echo that. I agree. Everyone's saying we're hearing that people will come, and we have experience that these other fire services and areas will respond, whether it's just a matter of duty or whatever the case is. But it would be nice to get a little more clarity before finalizing anything with rural metro on, anything that could be put in writing or how that really works.
So-
I mean, the way I understood it, sorry, Leslie, is it's really, I don't want to diminish it, but say it's a best effort. Like everything available will be deployed, but we don't know if everything is going to be available because we don't know what the future holds and we don't know what multiple events will be occurring. And so,
wonder-
that's the unknown.
With any situation, a catastrophic event and crisis of the sort that we see on a rare occasion, it's hard to imagine how any of it comes together on any circumstance. It just happens. One of the things that occurs to me in this with the, we've quite clearly kind of taken a big gulp at the price tag that we've been presented with, the estimated price tag on what it takes to be involved in automatic aid. And particularly if we look at 3,000 or 3,700 residents and we divide that by a $3 million price tag, that's a pretty hefty cost per resident for coverage in our community, and probably more hefty than you would see in just about any other station perimeter around, I would think. So I think what gets confused in this issue, though, is that we're not a community that's trying to be cheap on this. So it's not so much, I know for my part, when I look at a price tag like that, it's not, looking for the cheapest deal. And my question that I don't know if it's been adequately explored, but in the event of a catastrophic issue, I would imagine that we would, as a town, have a contingency reserve set up to help cover the costs of a catastrophic event. If we're having to call in others for help, and it's over and above what that mutual help requires, are we prepared to pay a bill if we're presented with a bill from an outside entity? Gary, I don't know how that works, but I do know it came up in conversation around the Cave Creek fires last year, that there was, a commitment of resources from Scottsdale, from Daisy Mountain, from other fire departments. And there was some concern that there was a lot of expense that they couldn't necessarily afford. Well, if we anticipate that and we say, we want to pay our fair share, right? It's not about our wanting to shirk that onto anyone else. It's like, so if we're confronted with that, can we
Yeah,
cover?
and I wouldn't compare ourselves, Carefree, that is, to Cave Creek and the situation
I
that Cave
understand.
Creek experienced, because the issue in Cave Creek, for everybody's edification, was they did not have any skin in the game. They did
Correct.
not have a master contract for fire service,
Yes.
and only 40% of their citizens paid through a subscription service for fire service. And so what the automatic aid partners said was, by default, we cannot be your fire department. You need, as a town, to invest in those resources.
Right.
The town of Carefree has already invested in those resources. Our model is similar to Fountain Hills. Fountain Hills owns their fire stations, and they have that mutual aid pact with Scottsdale and some of the surrounding Indian communities that are nearby Fountain Hills. So, it does exist throughout the state, these mutual aid pacts. They do respond when there is a fire. These firefighters don't know the paperwork that we're looking on. They just want to ensure that people are safe, and they will respond to these instances. So we will get response. I'm not concerned about that. I'm not concerned about the liability because of the difference between our model and Cave Creek. And we also have an IGA with the Department of Forestry, so that when we have these air tankers that come to our community, when you have these large regional responses and you have a fire coming, a wildfire coming through the community, it's not fought through a piece of ground equipment, it's fought through the air.
Yeah.
And that's where you really secure the communities. And that's what you see across the nation with the fires that we're experiencing. We have invested in that. We do have that line of attack. We do have coordination with the county and emergency management. We do have an identified emergency manager. We do have the bones and the meat on the bones that Cave Creek did not have. So we do have a good baseline.
I think that belongs in the pro side column, a description along those lines in the mutual aid pro column. So I'd like to try to capture that language to talk about that preparation that exists, because that supports, in my mind.
I think we have another huge advantage that our management has done such a good job where we do not have any debt. We have a reasonably nice reserve. So, and going to Leslie's point there, if we would have a problem that would cost a little bundle or a big bundle of money, we do have something to fall back on. And it's because of where we stand financially, which I think is to our advantage.
So automatic aid has a settling up figure, if I recall. That was part of the cost feature, that there's a.
That's for dispatch.
I thought it was a matter of checking, seeing the balance sheet, like how many out calls and in calls, and then there's a, no, on a settling.
The formal settling up process, as I understand it, and Gary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, for example, when Scottsdale provided an estimate, they estimated 750 calls would be dispatched within Carefree. Now, if only 600 calls occurred, then we get a credit for next year's bill of 150 calls times $28. Now, but if we had 800, then our next year's bill would be at 800 with plus the deficit, at times $28. That's the settling up process. There's a larger question about, for example, how many times there was some tension evidently between the city of Phoenix and the city of Scottsdale when they wanted to decommission a fire station, or they wanted to short staff it or something like that, that Phoenix didn't believe that Scottsdale was toting their load. Okay. And so, like, if we were to be automatic aid and Daisy Mountain took over that station on Carefree Highway, they would probably dispatch 100 calls into Carefree every year, just like Rural Metro has been doing. We, on the other hand, might be dispatching 200 or 300 calls into Cave Creek down into the downtown station. Yes. That's not going to be a settling up process. That's going to be Life and Safety Committee saying, wait a minute, Cave Creek, you need to put more resources, Daisy Mountain, you need to put more resources in Cave Creek because Carefree is responding too much into your side. That's a judgment call. That's my understanding. Is that your understanding, Gary?
Yes, and one of the elements of automatic aid, looking into the future, if Daisy Mountain comes in and serves Cave Creek, is the response then into Cave Creek and perhaps into Carefree in the future? What does that look like? If we enter into an automatic aid pact with Daisy Mountain, for example, and we know that there's many more assets to the south of Carefree because a large section of Carefree fronts onto the city of Scottsdale with assets just to the south and east, that there might be more frequent response to with Scottsdale's assets than Daisy Mountain's assets. Is that a liability to the town of Carefree in the future? Will Scottsdale then complain to the Life Safety Council, look, this is not equitable. And so my concern is it's not always the cheapest one short term. We have to look long term at this automatic aid pack to reconcile how this equipment will be dispatched over time. And so since we don't know at this point in time what the level of service in Cave Creek is, and they don't even know those answers right now. They know that they'll have one fire station. Where that fire station on the west side will be, they're trying to reconcile that. Where a fire station, they talk about conceptually the need for 3 fire stations, one closer to Spur Cross Ranch. How all those are going to be spaced and what the respective response time into Carefree will be versus Scottsdale, we don't know, because we don't know where those fire stations will be. So, you know, the issue with timing with this decision with automatic aid, who's the appropriate partner? Is it Daisy Mountain? Is it Scottsdale? We know what Scottsdale has right now. And we know that they're probably not going to put any more stations up in this area, but we don't know where Daisy Mountain's going to put those stations. So does it make more sense for Scottsdale long-term than it does with Daisy Mountain? These are things that over time will be reconciled. But you know, we have to look long-term because there could be some significant costs to the town of Carefree if we make a poor decision today, a rash decision today.
What struck me, I went back to some of the original Life Safety Council stuff, and it hadn't really dawned on me that this group and this idea of automatic aid is relatively new in the scheme of things. Back, 10 years ago, when the current situation was put in place and there was the recommendation and report that supported it, there was no automatic aid, didn't exist. So the conversation was in effect simpler. So since it's only been since 2017 that this thing has taken shape, from what I understand.
Yeah, automatic aid has been around for a while, so it predates our contract with Rural Metro.
It does. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe it's the Life Safety Council then has been convened or operating. There was something in that verbiage that caught my eye, and I thought, well, maybe this is part of the growing pains of a system that's still figuring out the kinks.
Gary, can I ask you a quick question? So
Sure.
the new fire station that's being built up on Cave Creek Road adjacent to Desert Mountain, is that going to be considered a Scottsdale fire station?
That is a Scottsdale fire station. That's 616, and I believe it's open now.
Oh, okay, that's great. I know a lot of people in Tonto Hills and Desert Mountain have been pushing that for a while. And is the other one down on Pima about 2 miles on the right?
That is correct. Yes.
That's also a Scottsdale. So they would probably be the 2 closest locations in theory of who would be responding in a serious fire.
That is correct. And then there's one down on, I believe, Dynamite or Joe Max.
I think it's Joe Max.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, I just want to be clear to get an idea of where those stations are. I know Daisy Mountain, makes sense maybe a little more logistically for Cave Creek, not that it doesn't necessarily for us, but I just kind of wanted to get an idea of where those closest engine stations were located. So thank you for the clarification.
Anything else on the pro and con? Is there anything in this table I've gotten really wrong? Quite possible. So please correct me if I need to, or things that are glaringly missing. And what I want to invite you, it feels like we have a little bit more time, and that was something to get to a little later in the meeting. But regardless of our decision, we were being driven by the idea that we had to get something before council so that they could make some sort of decision if in fact it was going to involve a property tax in early October. Well, that's off the table. We have a little bit more breathing room in our time frame. And it feels like today we can have this conversation, we could begin to fill this out, but I wanted to invite you to take it away and in your own leisure and time to fill it in with your thinking, and not simply put you on the spot for that just today, but invite your longer term thinking and deeper thinking, and that we can continue to work this and come back to it and develop it
I don't,
over the next month.
do you want specific comments, Madam Chairman, or what would you,
Yes, yes,
what's your pleasure?
yes, thank you. Please call me Leslie, Peter.
Well, I want to
Thank you.
maintain Robert's rules of order and go.
Oh,
to the chair.
yeah, I know.
Um,
Okay,
On your page 2 on the bottom under cons,
yeah,
that it's a con, that's a certificate of necessity, the CON. That there's no question about that. Somebody has to make a positive effort to apply for a CON because, as I understand it, rural Metro has the CON and maybe Maricopa has a CON that covers that territory but has not exercised it. Is that your understanding, Gary?
That is, I understand that there is a overlap with Maricopa over a portion of the town of Carefree, whether it's the entire portion of Carefree or not, I'm not familiar with, but I know there's an overlap with Maricopa, which services the city of Scottsdale. I also know that there's discussions internal to the city of Scottsdale that perhaps they look at their own CON. That's going to be an evolution as well too. But rural Metro holds the CON for the town of Carefree as well as the town of Cave Creek, and certainly they're going to preserve their business interests in maintaining that CON in the future.
Right. Yeah, there's an option for the town of Carefree to consider applying for a CON. I'm not sure what the process is. I imagine it's rather extensive, but
Yes.
but that's an option. The advantage of holding the CON is that transports generate revenue, which you can use to offset the cost of your fire service.
That is correct.
I just, this is going on, Madam Chairman, Leslie. I'm just trying to send a message to my friends at Rural Metro under mutual aid. Service quality and responsiveness have been exemplary as measured by the performance metrics. I'm still waiting for performance metrics.
oh,
I want them to understand that I'm still waiting for, and I don't understand what the challenge is.
okay,
I think that under the second bullet, under mutual aid, under the con side, this uncertainty with where a station's going to be or how Carefree under a contract with Rural Metro would address the west side is of high importance. What would be the response times? I thought that it would add another 6 minutes, not another 1 or 2 minutes to the response times, but I don't know what the facts of that are. And I would think that we would have some kind of something in an agreement. And generally I favor going with Rural Metro again, but I would want to have something in there that assures the town of Carefree that our residents on the west side are going to be adequately and appropriately served. And that includes mutual aid, at least an explanation of why they do not have one with Daisy Mountain, and what they propose to do about that, and clarification on the Scottsdale Fire Department's mutual aid kind of a situation.
got it.
And then on the top of page 4, that first line, as long as existing mutual aid agreements remain in place. As I just pointed out, I don't know that there are in place. 3 lines down, the burden on Carefree's fire and emergency responses should decline. I'm not sure that's true. Once Cave Creek goes to automatic aid, I just don't know that that's true. And then down in your sales tax versus property tax, second bullet point under cons, you might just say, based on the information that Gary shared with us today, that historically the existing sales tax revenue has not been enough to cover fire service.
Okay,
All of a sudden it is. And I guess related to that is, Gary, do you have any idea of why a contract with rural Metro would go from $1.5 million to $1.9 million, the $400,000 increase? Have they provided an explanation to you of why that's occurring?
They have not. I met with Chief Gilbert and asked him to outline the reason why, and he has not given me a reason why. I can guess that perhaps it's leveraging our master contract to offset the liability of that second station on the west side there. That was in part covered by those subscribers in Cape Creek. And if that station is to be maintained in the future in some form or fashion, there is some financial liability there, and perhaps that's some offset of that liability. That's what I could piece together.
Okay. That's kind of what I have until we get to your motions.
Peter, those notes, have you noted those on the document?
Yeah,
Can you send me a copy of that?
sure. Was this in PDF or wasn't PDF?
No, it wasn't unless it was shared with you in PDF. I don't know, but
Okay.
originally it was in Word.
Okay. Once we get into a discussion of property tax, I guess my question to you, Leslie, would be, under property tax, you say it wouldn't be a viable revenue source and before 2025. And I would, even if you didn't go to an election this year in 22, if you won in 23, that would make it available by 24 at the earliest. So I just,
Yeah,
unless that was a policy decision, that you just said 25 is a good year.
can you hold that thought 1 second?
Sure.
I want to just make sure that we're through for now with this table. And again, invite any of you to weigh in with your edits. And then I'm happy to take those and incorporate them in and continue to create the next version.
Well, I have a couple quick questions on hearing Peter speak. I guess this is geared towards Gary. So when is the earliest that the council could propose a vote on property tax? Let's say you'd said we want to do this as soon as possible. When would that go to a vote?
I would, and I don't want to put words in the
No,
council's
Of course.
mouth, but I would think they would want more community dialogue to educate them on the need. And so obviously the property tax question, if that was proposed to the voters, could only go on the ballot at the May election. That's what the Arizona Vice statute permits.
Okay,
So
understood.
it's once a year, May election.
May
You're
election.
back into that date. You're looking somewhere around mid-December to have the council elect to put it on the ballot, and then the language, I think, needs to go to the county by sometime in early January. So that's the timeline to get it on the ballot for a May election. But that being said, there's a lot of education. We've gone through and done a deep dive on this and listened to each one of the providers. We know that there's a structural deficit right now. Educating the residents on what is the structural deficit? How does it exist? What was the original funding mechanism? What's the difference between automatic aid and mutual aid? What's the benefit for me? Why does it cost more than mutual aid? Can't we get a better price for it? These are things that the residents need to understand, and to do that in a matter of months before the council puts this on the ballot just doesn't justify the importance of the level of service and the issues that are in front of us as a community. So I think you would need more time, at least a year, to have that discussion and get some buy-in and some direction from the community. So I think that the discussions are healthy here. I think some of the thoughts are there's some good logic behind it. But at the end of the day, the citizens have to support this initiative. And if they don't support it, we're right back where we started.
Okay.
So you have to be successful. And how do you build success? Through communication. That needs to be cultivated, and that's going to take some time. I think you would need some lead time before you actually put something like this on the ballot.
I definitely appreciate the clarity. I wasn't trying to encourage pushing it. I was just curious, like what the process was like. The other question I have is, do we know roughly what the annual subscription is for people that pay into rural metro for fire protection? I'm just curious roughly. I know I'd asked you this once before. I just didn't remember. I don't know if it's a couple $100. Is it $1,000?
During their presentation, the rural metro folks said their average subscription was $550.
Okay, so 550, which they have to pay for that service, where in Carefree it's currently covered. The reason I was asking that question is I'm trying to look at the numbers. If we did propose a property tax increase, of what that number would be like. Let's say it's going to be higher than 550. If we needed $1.66 or closer to 1,000, at least we can have some sort of leverage in saying, Cave Creek residents have to pay extra for this as is. We're looking at this to have some additional, maybe protection versus mutual aid. So I'm just trying to work some numbers out in my own mind and making a decision. So thank you for that clarity there, Pete.
Yeah, to the point of estimating that the revenue from any proposed property tax could be fiscal 2025. That's assuming that's a budget year that starts July 1st, 2024, correct? Gary? When
Yes,
you
that'll be,
approve.
yes.
So to get a property tax passed, to get the collection of that property tax rolling and in the coffers so that it can actually be used, I would stand by my fiscal 25 budget year estimate.
I'm not advocating this, but if you had an election on May of 23, the council would essentially levy a property tax in August of 23.
Correct.
It would be empowered, and then it would be collected in the 23-24 fiscal year.
Correct. And begin to be available to fund budget when?
No, you can start spending it as soon as it's authorized, and the cash
Okay.
reserves are there available at the county that state investment fund. You can draw against your reserves. It's a bookkeeping entry.
Okay.
You don't have to wait until you get cash in hand.
Okay. That's what I didn't know. Thanks. Yeah. So we'll back it up a year on that.
Gary, that figure that rural metro gave, that we have an estimate on here, that was locked in for 3 years before any escalation.
That is correct, yes.
Maybe that's part of why they have a little bit of an increase in our cost here to begin with. We're anticipating some increase in their costs between the first 3 years.
Okay. And just a comment on the performance measures, Peter, that you raised. I was taking that from the annual reports that we were seeing. Their reported metrics on their response times.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I drew that assumption. That may need to be corrected. Okay. All right. Well, you have an invitation to add to, if you've already done the work of adding your own thinking into a document, please send it on to me and I'll mush them all together for the next version. And if you have any follow-on thoughts to this conversation about what you would add or not. And Peter, thank you for weighing in with changes you might suggesting what's already here. So with that, we can move to the sales tax and the revenue thing. And I do want to say, one of the things I realized that's not included in here that I would go back and add are the options that Sheila, I think in your presentations, but your part of the presentation, you outlined option 1, 2, and 3. I think it included a total sales tax reliance, a blended sales property tax, and then a total property tax. Is that the gist of the 3 options?
Well, we didn't actually put that, the gist of the 3 options. We just had the options of looking at a sales tax model and what that would entail, and then the property tax model, what that would entail. And that actually did include 2 versions of if we went completely with the property tax to cover the entire master contract, or if we did a blended of the current sales tax and then the property tax.
Yeah.
And then we looked at how we could finance or fund capital costs.
Okay, so that should probably be fleshed out a little bit in here. It's not clear that those are 3 options that, and we might want to spend some time on, and I can include them in here so we don't lose track of those as options. I do mention that it's a blended approach. Maybe that was just my bias in this. I probably would back that out and indicate these are the 3 options. And we actually could do this conversation with a pro and con analysis of each of those 3 options. Using that as opposed to just property, or do just sales, just property, or blended. And then what are the pros and cons of each of those? Do you think?
Yeah, which I think we did in the presentation and talked about, the limitations to going fully with just a sales tax model is number 1, you would have to increase it to a level which I believe would be kind of diminishing returns, where you're getting up to over 10%, well over 10%, and people are thinking, well, I don't have to go to Bosco's Business to buy dog or cat food. I can go 5 minutes down the road and get a 2% or 3 percentage point cheaper option. And so we looked at the pros and cons of that. And then we looked at, from a property tax perspective, the pros and cons of that side as well, of, it is obviously more complex, and that it will be maybe obviously a bigger hurdle, but it does align the benefits with the costs pretty much perfectly. And to Gary's point earlier about, if we did, hope it doesn't happen, lose a big, commercial operator in our town, that would be a big hit to our budget. And from my perspective, having a combination of property tax and sales tax puts you in a much more stronger fiscal position than if you're solely reliant on one revenue stream. And so, going down the road, you never know what's going to happen. But you don't want Carefree to have a budget crisis, because then we all have a crisis. And you can't not pay, these fixed costs, like for fire. You can make cuts in some areas, but still we're a very thin, small town, and there's not any fat. I mean, and as Gary talked about earlier too, we have to save up money for capital costs, for maintenance and whatnot, as a small town, where a lot of large cities don't have to do that, but we do have to do that. So we don't want to, get ahead of our skis where we're, trying to juggle. There aren't enough balls to cover everything that needs to get covered. So that's why I think a more stable approach would be a combined, property tax, sales tax, or go full on with the property tax for public safety in general, because we're going to be talking about the sheriff's office soon and police side of it, which is going to be more.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, I just wanted to say what I would do, and my apologies. It was just inadvertent, and in my just inability to get my head around all of it all the time. I left that out, and I think really what I need to do is just go back into what you all have already created with that presentation, lift that language out and place it in this document.
Yeah,
So,
you did capture some of it.
some of it,
Yeah,
but I may have, so I'll go, that'll be my part. And in version 2, then I'll have that more clearly presented, if that works. So that those options are fully discussed and fleshed out, and there's some evidence of our thinking, that we've weighed the pros and cons on each of these, and therefore, whatever those, then moving to the final thing, which is, well, at the end there, I suggest or begin to suggest some language for what would we go through or go forward with to the council based on our work, and what would potentially motions look like that we might recommend. And that we'd have everything that flowed before that should justify whatever it is that we decide those to be. And Peter, that was thanks to you. I think you weighed in with that and the urging of starting to get some language in place and down that had to do with, what are the motions that we want to make. Anyway, before we go there, I also just lifted the table from the last report in 2012 that looked at the comparative analysis between, at that point, was all the same players. And I took that and lifted it out and added some pieces in here to begin to look at across, the providers, took automatic and mutual aid out of the conversation and just looked at the providers and how those were stacking up. Is that helpful? Do we want to go there?
Yeah.
Is there other criteria that you would add to this list? That's not included here that we've touched on already in our conversations?
Leslie, I think that when you get to personnel automatically dispatched, you can
Yes.
clarify rural metro a little bit. In that they dispatch both an engine and an ambulance, and combined, they have five firefighters and 2 paramedics on scene. The 2 paramedic firefighter is kind of dangling there.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, I think that's where it's 3 firefighters and then the 2 paramedics. What my understanding is, one is a paramedic, the other one is a firefighter, not necessarily both.
Oh, my understanding with that everybody that goes is a firefighter, but one on the engine and one on the ambulance are paramedics.
That could be. I may be misunderstood that.
I think all the firefighters, whether they're rural metro or any of the automatic aids, are all trained in EMS pretty much across the board now.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And is it clear with both Daisy Mountain and Scottsdale, they don't necessarily send an ambulance on every call? Is that correct?
I think rural metro responds in that case. That's my understanding. They would either respond from our station or from the west side to any of those calls. That's my.
Yeah, so Daisy Mountain and Scottsdale would send a fire truck. They would, the fire truck paramedic on there would stabilize the patient, and the ambulance is there to transport the patient.
Rural metro, right?
For Scottsdale and Daisy Mountain, you don't necessarily get an ambulance dispatch associated with a service call. With rural metro, you will get automatically both the ambulance and the fire truck.
Right. Also, Leslie, under your EMS line ambulance, Daisy Mountain has a CON, but that's not in our service territory.
Okay. I didn't know, the CON thing I find very confusing, so I wasn't quite sure how to record
Okay.
that.
It's for the privilege or the right to transport people in an ambulance.
Okay,
That's what it is.
so Daisy Mountain has that, Peter, you're saying, but not, it wouldn't serve Carefree.
Right. It's a geographically defined area that they can service, and it does not extend into Carefree.
Okay, so in essence, because Rural Metro holds the Rural Metro staff under the ambulance service and the say Daisy Mountain or Scottsdale Fire, they coordinate across those two entities.
If we were going into automatic aid with Daisy Mountain or Scottsdale, given a call, an engine would dispatch. They would get there, as Gary said, stabilize the patient. If the patient needs to be transported, they would then call Rural Metro and they would dispatch an ambulance.
Okay. Okay. Okay, any other? I don't know how important it is, the monthly, quarterly, and annual reports.
Right.
That's kind of a given type thing. I don't know why it was part of the last assessment. Those are criteria.
Yeah. And same with utilities included in I mean, the fire hydrant inspections, I think, would be important. The vehicle maintenance would be TBD, I would think. But one of the things that you have there is grant writing that Rural Metro does, and just them getting the breathing apparatus, from what I understand, those things, the scuba gear that they wear on their back. My understanding is that they knocked down $100,000 grant to replace those this year, and I'm not sure how much Scottsdale or Daisy Mountain or Chase's grant writing. So I think that's important to leave in, and leave question marks for the other two.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Any other criteria or assessment criteria you would use that we haven't thought about or touched on or included?
Going back to like a broken record, when you have the third line down, automatic aid and mutual aid, I still have questions about what Rural Metro has and or what Carefree has and what that means.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a big takeaway from today's conversation. And Gary, I hope,
The other question that I would have would be, and I think it's new this time because of the changes in Cave Creek, is what kind of coverage or response times are we to expect for the west side of town?
Yeah.
I think that they can solve maybe the ambulance problem much easier than they can solve the fire engine problem. And given the balance of the calls, 75% of their calls are medical in nature. I have an aside. When looking at the and maybe Gary, you can answer me this. I know that if you have a burglar alarm and it goes off in the city of Phoenix, they give you like 2 free times and then they start charging you for dispatch.
That is correct. And Scottsdale has a similar program. We do not in the town of Carefree. We actually used to have it, but we do not have that anymore.
But I was, if you look at the annual report, the second largest category of calls is fire and medical alarms, which are, they were explained. I thought that they explained those as being false alarms. And I'm wondering if we ought not be thinking about charging for that. have, you get 2 free passes or something, but if somebody has a chronically broken fire alarm or medical alarm, as a matter of public service, I'm not sure that that's where we ought to be spending resources on.
Yeah, well, the pendulum swings back and forth. So about
I
15
understand.
years ago, the council took that provision out of the town code. So yes, we had that, and then a number of residents came and complained at a council meeting that they were being assessed fees and didn't think it was fair.
How many free times did they get?
I think 2 free times in one 12-month period, 1 calendar year.
So, okay, that's a pretty entitled population.
Okay. All right, and I again invite your thinking on this. You don't feel on the spot to have to come up with these things today. Feel free to either put them to me in writing or just shoot me an email for things to include. It doesn't look like, and at this time I wanted to just bring in thinking. Anton, I think I mentioned earlier, is on the road somewhere in the Colorado mountains and wasn't able to attend today's meeting, obviously wasn't sure, but he had a couple of thoughts and I just wanted to read these into you. So they might spark some other thinking on your part, but I also wanted to make sure that we included his thinking in the conversation and in the next version of this. I think he says one of the concerns he has is that in assuming that maybe using rural metro would address the cost concerns in presented through automatic aid, that we should not, it wouldn't obviate the need for a property tax. So his concern is that we not assume by going with a lower cost option, if that becomes the salient point in deciding to stay with the rural metro and go with the mutual aid contract on a cost basis, that we still keep the property tax question alive and in our minds, that regardless, we need to consider that at this point in the town's in the town's operations and history right now. So he wanted to be sure and have that underlined. He said, I believe we are leaning toward a property tax model eventually, regardless of which path we choose. He questions, would using rural metro for 5 more years allow us to delay a property tax vote? And if so, by how many years? Would changing to automatic aid give voters a stronger reason to vote to approve a property tax? If a property tax initiative isn't approved under mutual aid, will Carefree be unable to increase revenues by enough later on to fund a possible change to automatic aid? And if so, should the size of the initial property tax be set at a rate sufficient to fund automatic aid, even if it is passed under mutual aid scenario? If we do use mutual aid, should we recommend a property tax large enough to fund at least 100%, with the idea of using a blended system later should we switch to automatic aid? Will automatic aid allow a blended system? If not, do we need to consider a path to 3.5 million or more in property tax? I think we covered this in the conversation, and you clarified, Sheila, that the initial thinking as you fleshed out those options was to use a $3 million figure.
Mhm.
So, okay, we might have addressed the concerns he's raising. If we want to choose automatic aid, it is clear, and he emphasizes the clear, we need a property tax funding initiative. Given the uncertainties, can a vote pass? Which fire department would we align with? Can we negotiate with an AA partner to pick up all the services currently provided by rural metro? It seems prudent to me that we still try to extend the contract with rural metro, for 5 years so we can use the next year or two to negotiate details and tie an eventual property tax vote directly to improvements in our fire system in 2027 or 2025. Okay, so that's his thinking. He's weighing in with that. And again, we'll use as much of that thinking and add it into the next version, but does it trigger any new thought for any of you, the response? No? Seems pretty consistent. I'm feeling like we have a fair degree of consistency here, which takes us to potentially on the draft motion language, which I guess I'd like to leave with you as a thought question, which is as we begin to kind of hone in and circle in on this and get clearer, what kind of motion is suggested in your mind for what we might, and in fact, to my earlier point, is a motion and leaving this work we do with a motion to put before the council where we want to end this.
Well, if I could chime in, kind of reiterating Sheila's thoughts and talking about budgets and, the 3 types of revenues that we can do, which is obviously we know that a sales tax for what we're looking for, which is really fire, EMS, and police services, in theory, should not be put on the businesses which are taxed high enough. But I also hear things about the property tax, the sales tax being the highest it's been, and experiencing all these people moving in here and spending money and doing so forth and so on. So initially, I was more inclined when this committee started to do the sales tax just so that we could lock up these contracts and kind of get the best deal if that were to be the case. After hearing the other committee's members a little hesitant to that for a lot of reasons. I do agree and align with Sheila's thoughts of that, this is really for the homeowners, this service, and why should the business owners pay for it? However, at the end of the day, the homeowners support the business owners. So it's kind of however you want to look at either side of that fence. But I do like the idea of some sort of combined sales tax increase with the property tax increase. And if we stayed with rural metro, maybe that sales tax can support that master contract, whether it be for a few years or longer term. And or, once we go to a property tax, part of that agenda could be possibly to remove the sales tax or that increase. I know some people have said once you increase it, you can't take it away, but I do like some idea of some sort of guaranteed money coming in, even if we stay with rural metro, as we're running in the negative now. And that's kind of just my general thoughts of, those 3 possibilities. And hearing that the sales tax property tax to get pushed through wouldn't happen until 2025, I don't think really serves us now. So that's just kind of my thoughts and feelings after hearing Anton chime in and the other committee members.
Okay. So we have a decision, a motion to test and to create that's on the funding and revenue side after having looked at all of the info that we have. And then we also need to test our minds on this question of automatic versus mutual aid. And the challenge we have in that is that they are intertwined with specific providers. It's not like we can have the conversation about automatic versus mutual aid and we have a dozen providers on each end of that stick. And then we therefore move into the conversation, having settled one question, we move into the next question because they're conflated. We can't separate them out. And that's been, I think, one of our challenges in the conversation. We can't talk about mutual aid standing alone as it's conceived without talking about rural metro. And so those cross. I don't know if we can do any better job or if there's anything better served to try to separate that out. And that's where I've struggled.
It almost seems like to me that we just have to probably decide one way or the other. Yes, we think that mutual aid will take care of our needs, or we want automatic aid. Seems like we need to decide one or the other. And then once we do decide mutual aid, then obviously we almost have the provider pick too. If we go to automatic aid, then we go back to, well, Scottsdale, Daisy Mountain, whoever. So, isn't it a kind of a factor? Let's find out if we're going to go with mutual aid or automatic aid, and then move forward based on that decision.
And Leslie, I think it was in your product that you produced here, but I don't see it right now. Also bringing up the question, can Carefree be its own fire department? Is that a possibility? And become automatic aid? Given the kind of money that might be spent on automatic aid anyhow.
Years ago, when we addressed that same proposition, it came to the fact that we have to set up pension plans and having employees and so forth and so on. And ultimately, it probably would be more expensive in the long run to have our own Carefree Fire Department, our own employees. And that's how we ended up kind of splitting the apple there by buying our own engine and facilities that helped us there. But was that not correct, Gary, that there's a lot of
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of costs with the chain of command that you would need in setting up your own fire department. So you're going to have to hire the executive level for that fire department to be part of automatic aid. And so, for example, Tolleson, I believe their figure was about $7 million to operate one firehouse. Now they have some industrial in town, and I think a ladder truck there that increased the cost. But you could probably shave a million or so off that figure. It will be at least $5 to $6 million for our own fire department.
Yeah, I think that, though I don't have any data to back up what I'm going to say, that we are a small town and we need at least one fire station. You could probably cover, and then there are obviously geographic issues to deal with, but you could probably cover a larger town with one fire station than what we have. But we have to have the basic structure of one fire station, which is expensive. On a per capita basis, I'll have to go back and look at the national fire statistics, but the firemen per capita, we were well covered. I remember thinking when I was looking at this data because of the small population that we have. But we do need the very basic one fire station, and that's expensive. Now, in a 2015 analysis of Scottsdale Fire Department, they did have a recommendation, but there's been no update to this 2015 analysis. It was 115 pages, so it was quite extensive and very interesting. But they did have a kind of recommendation, if you will, of putting in these kind of mini fire stations up above the one on Cave Creek that just came in. And they would be staffed by 2 people with a fire truck that's more similar to like a regular truck or an SUV that would be primarily emergency response. Emergency medical response only, not any other type of emergency response, which I thought was kind of interesting, but there's no updated, like they don't talk about it in their 3-year plan going forward or anything like that. But anyway, that, we are a small town, but we need the very basic infrastructure of one fire station, which is expensive.
Yeah. I think the question may be, Kim, also, if to me, exploring more fully what our options are going forward in the future. That perhaps the thinking we do and the recommendations we make at this stage are that we proceed along these lines. At the same time, we continue to explore and look at, going forward, what the future may hold. And part of what we're kind of up against, I'm feeling, is a timeline that is, we're kind of in crunch. We need to, we're a little limited at this point, given the contract ending and the questions of how we pay for it. So maybe what we're doing is suggesting that there is more work to continue to do on this question, that what we can suggest in the interim is a plan for the next 1 to 4 years. So here are 5 years, and here's what we think could happen in that period of time. But that our thinking needs to maybe consider some staged evolution of this.
And I have 2 other thoughts I'd like to just add real quick. In considering automatic aid, which is basically going to be probably double of what it would be for mutual aid, regardless of the length of the next contract. I know that the Scottsdale chief had mentioned big concerns about staffing just in general, even though they're building new firehouses closer to Carefree. And that's a real big concern from my end in dealing with Scottsdale, although logistically, I think if we did go to automatic aid, they make better sense. And then I kind of think at Daisy Mountain, I think, well, although this negotiation may have to be considered separately, the fact that Cave Creek might go with them, is there any sort of leverage we have or advantage or even logistics of going with Daisy Mountain over Scottsdale if we were to consider automatic aid? And could we get them off their numbers knowing that they would be working with Cave Creek and Carefree if we went that route?
That may be the advantage of some interim thinking and some additional work, because there's so much uncertainty right now with respect to how things are going to settle out with Cave Creek's work. We may be in a much better position to make a decision regarding that question of automatic aid, or how we participate and who we bring in as a partner, in a few years after the dust is settled.
It seemed like to me that in doing a, let's call it an automatic aid and trying to get along with and into Cave Creek and Daisy Mountain and our town, then you've got 3 entities. And I don't know how we haven't been very good at getting along with Cave Creek in the past, except for 1 or 2 things that Gary's worked out. But I think that might pose a real problem for us personally.
Gary, I think I missed the detail earlier. You were saying rural Metro is not interested in a short-term contract. What would they define as short-term?
Less than 5 years.
Less than. Okay,
Yes. So we discussed with them, based upon a previous conversation that we had with the committee, about a 1-year bridge contract to get us through this initial or this next year. And they weren't interested in that. And they said basically the term of the next contract would be 5 years with an option to renew for another 5 years.
Okay.
It just seems to me that the way that I think about this is that the first thing that has to happen is that we have to get assurances from rural Metro that they can cover the west side in a reasonable fashion, and that they will have appropriate mutual aid agreements in place, which maybe they do. I just don't understand it. If they can't do that, if they can't give us those assurances, they knock themselves out. Because I don't know how you go to the west side and say, oh, all of Carefree is going to be with a 3-minute and 19-second response rate, except you, and you're 15 minutes. I don't know how the council could even begin to consider that. So they have to make some assurances, it seems to me, before we can consider. And I suspect that they have a way to do that. I would just like to see it. And then that would have to be part of your option one motion. You know, blah, 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 assuming that X, Y, and Z is included in the contract.
Gary, does the town of Carefree have a mutual aid agreement with City of Phoenix?
We do not, no.
Not.
But
okay.
case in point, when the wedding cake house caught fire, Phoenix was called for mutual aid and they arrived. So
Okay.
I have yet to see a adjoining fire district or municipal fire department not respond when called upon.
Yeah, because Phoenix has that fire department right off Cave Creek Road, just barely south of Carefree Highway, about a mile and a half or so.
Yes.
That's okay.
But we know that Phoenix isn't interested in taking care of Carefree. They've made that clear.
That is correct.
Right, but if we had, it would be nice going, if we decided rural metro, be nice to know we could also have a mutual aid agreement with City of Phoenix, who is pretty close to the west side.
Yep.
And then even with automatic aid, that would put that particular fire department pretty darn close to the west side as well, irregardless of what Cave Creek ends up with.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
And you heard from rural metro early on about mutual aid being conventional throughout the nation. And you know, this in urban areas, automatic aid is certainly makes a little bit more sense as a regional fire department to service urbanized areas. Mutual aid works throughout the nation, and it certainly still works here. Salt River Indian Community, Fountain Hills, there's some outlining areas that rural metro services. They call upon assistance on a daily basis, and they receive that assistance. You know, in some cases there's exceptions. There is exceptions to every rule, but it does work. It does cause some delays sometimes, but the assistance is there. I never have seen the assistance not be there.
And then I think what we learned from touring during their fire station too is they also can send from their other rural metro entities as well, wherever else they are.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I think one of the learning pieces for me too was instructed to hear that neither Daisy Mountain or Scottsdale had any existing contracts of the sort that we were asking to enter. So there's not a lot of track history with how we do this. And I think for me, I get left feeling like, well, yeah, you want a system, you want to be a player in a system where everyone's working together and, you know, we're only, you know, as strong as our weakest link. And so everyone's got skin in the game to make this work. But I'm feeling also we're a small community and don't fit into models that cost these things out. And so I'm looking for something that works with us, right? That comes part of the distance and doesn't put us into the same mold or squeeze us into the same box that perhaps they normally would. So anyway, I don't know if that's possible.
And there are contracts that are out there that we can use as models. For example, Paradise Valley and City of Phoenix have a great contract that works for both communities, and it's economical. Paradise Valley has a larger financial capacity than both the town of Carefree and Cave Creek combined. But their contract is $2.8 million for 1.5 fire stations. How can that be? So, you know, it's a difficult pill for me to swallow with the costs that are being thrown around by our neighboring communities and partners. You know, it's something that, and I understand they have a fiduciary duty to protect their interests, but there's something to be said that there's infrastructure that we've invested in that adds value to their respective infrastructure. And that should be leveraged on top of, we all know that 74 or 75% of the calls are medical calls. And those calls typically have transportation. And there's money to be made through that transportation. So is there some way that you can create a model that works for all of them? And that's something, it's like a Rubik's Cube with these guys. I'm trying to figure out, and haven't cracked that nut yet.
And, Gary, if I could just add, I come from a firefighter family in New York City, and we've had these discussions back east, and, people fleeing the fire department, and people don't want to be a fireman anymore for all these reasons. Now living in an urban community, I have a much different take on it, but I do feel that with all the fires that are going on, not only in our areas and specifically with Cave Creek last year, but in the Case-Sears ruins and the other fires, I think a lot of them, when it comes to their business models, are trying to leverage what's going on, and getting these numbers way, way up. And, I don't know if there is any way to, when push comes to shove, if we were going to consider one of these automatic aids, if the numbers are set in stone, especially without providing the additional information, or if in fact we can negotiate prior to making a decision. So I think there's a lot of that going on, and we're seeing that in other parts of the country as well, where there's a lot of fires that are prevalent.
It's also difficult to be asked to make a decision about automatic aid and make that an official council decision to open the door to more detailed discussions when that essentially closes the door to us. It closes the door to the other option. So in essence, we lose any ability to negotiate that, it seems. So that's just.
Well, and you make that choice, you better have the funding stream to support that, because that's not a choice you can back away from. Once rural metro is gone, they're gone.
That's right.
How are you going to fund that long term? So you better have the funding mechanism in place before you select that, when you go down that road.
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line message. All right, people, is there anything more to this conversation or document? It was wonderful and rich, and we covered a lot of territory. So anything you want to say? Are you ready to bring some closure to this meeting?
Just one question, Gary. When Scottsdale, I know you talked to maybe the city manager there. Do they, as a city, have a strategic plan to deal with all the retirements that are coming up in the fire department? I mean, are they out recruiting high school students, going to the high schools, junior colleges and whatnot? Or are they just going to see what happens? I mean, have they mentioned anything like that?
I have not had a discussion with Chief Shannon or Jim Thompson, their city manager, about how they're going to attack that. I think they've been planning for that. They haven't disclosed that to me. That's not been part of our discussion.
Yeah.
I do know their pension's 93% funded. I do know that back in 2003 or 4, when they decided to come in the municipal fire department, they hired up within 6 months, the entire fire department.
Wow.
So
yeah,
it can be done. They will be taking from nearby fire agencies and rural metro. So there are other firefighters around us that are looking for greener pastures. So Scottsdale is an excellent organization to work for. I one time worked for them. So I'm sure they're going to easily hire up. So I'm not worried about that.
okay.
Just not to drag this out any longer, but I just wanted to check too. Leslie, and when you're talking about trying to fit something with our community, there's another thing that's a little bit baffled me all along, is why rural metro cannot become automatic aid. I mean, we've heard Daisy Mountain talk and say they're not equipped the same, they're not trained the same. We've heard rural metro give a presentation and say exactly the opposite. So and it seems to me that it's sort of a big elephant in the room and something very political that I don't completely understand what's going on there. And it also makes me think, if we can't qualify rural metro for automatic aid through Life Safety Council, is there something deficient about rural metro that we don't know? So that, I don't know if anybody can explain this any better, except for that they're a for-profit. Other than that, I don't know precisely what's driving this.
From what little I understand, it's a very, very old question and a very, very old issue. It's nothing that hasn't been in play for many, many years. That's what I've come to understand.
There's no way to resolve it.
So there's, yeah.
I
So
don't think we're going to resolve that.
Okay.
I think there's obviously motivations behind it from a labor perspective, that perhaps they don't want a for-profit entity in the tent. But there could be other factors, some other political factors between rural metro and the other municipal fire departments. Rural metro's on the outside looking in, and I don't think they'll be allowed inside that tent. Life Safety Council is run by the fire chiefs from the respective municipal fire departments. So they're the ones who have the vote. It's a weighted vote system, and Phoenix is the big boy, followed by Mesa.
Yep.
I don't think they have a chance.
Okay, but there's nothing in their guidelines that say because you're for profit, you're excluded from that. That's
I don't think you'll ever see that.
okay. Okay, so it's just a big issue that we're going to fix.
And I think I try to make a point in one sentence here in what I've shared so far, which is these issues that are in the political realm are most likely beyond our charge as a citizen advisory group, and that our charge should remain in the practical, weigh the evidence, weigh the facts, come up with an informed decision, and acknowledge that some of this does boil down to the political realm, and they don't pay us the big bucks for that. Nor our council, right?
Or any at all.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any other follow-on final comments? Well, I look forward to hearing from you all with any further thoughts, and look forward to a second version. I will say, I'm saying that with a little trepidation. I'm hitting the road. I will be in the mountains of Idaho, I think, for our next meeting. I'm going to do my best to show up, as I have. I'm going to be a little challenged. So just so you know that, but I'll do my best to take your best thinking and come back to you with a second version for us to begin to finalize. Okay.
And if Leslie, if you can't make it and you want to discuss any sort of outline you want me to present, just let me know.
Thank you so much, Phil. I
course.
really appreciate that. And yes, you and I, we can talk.
Bring us back some potatoes.
Okay. All right. Well, anything else? And
Yes, Leslie,
Yeah.
thank you for putting this together. I think it's very helpful, and I think you did a wonderful job.
thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad it was helpful. I'm glad. And I'm taking away some good suggestions and ideas to make it better. So thank you. All right. Be well. Any last things, Gary, on your end?
Nope, not on my end. I did receive a text from Dave Maxwell from Daisy Mountain to follow up on automatic aid. And he refers to, to qualify, you have to have certain staffing levels, regional dispatch, things that, we are aware of. But Rural Metro has stated that they will follow those requirements. And it's still not good enough. So I don't know what more they can do outside that of promising that they will address all those things, similar to what Scottsdale did with the dispute with the city of Phoenix, when Scottsdale had 3 men per truck on the north of Bell Road, and Phoenix complained it requires 4, and Scottsdale hired up. Rural Metro would do the same thing. We would require that they would have 4 on the truck. We would do all the requirements as outlined in automatic aid to fulfill those requirements. And still, we do not get those positive results through the Life Safety Council. So I would appeal to David Maxwell. If that's true and they meet all those requirements, then will rural Metro be part of automatic aid if they fulfill all those requirements? If it's yes, then open the door. If it's no, then let us know. Simple as that. So that's my follow-up with Dave Maxwell there.
Okay. General, one follow-up, Gary. Are we fulfilling our duty to you in
Yes.
providing the kind of support? Are we on point? And is this proving helpful to you? You will ultimately carry the water on this, so.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
like I said before, this same process is the process that the council would go through and trying to reconcile all these different issues. And so it's healthy to get another body, a citizen-driven body that had nothing to gain, no experience with this issue, to look at this with a fresh set of eyes and make your recommendations. And you're driving towards that recommendation. And I think it's been a very open, transparent, and healthy process.
Okay. All right. Good deal. Be well, all. I think
All right.
we can
Thank you,
officially
guys.
adjourn.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Gary.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.